Welcome everyone, it's Jeff here from the Burning Archive. In a moment I'm going to bring you part 3, the final part of my extended interview with Professor Michael Jabara Carley about his book Stalin's Great Game, describing, the start of World War II from 1939 to 1941. In this video we discuss the catastrophe of Operation Barbarossa, the nature of its impact, and the unthinkable act of the British and perhaps even American governing elites in 1945 when they dreamt up a plan while the war was still raging, while the Soviet Union was approaching Berlin to, remove Hitler from power. They dreamt up an operation called Operation Unthinkable that would actually turn the British and American guns on the Soviet Union itself. We discussed that and its moral implications, as well as the overall significance of Michael's extraordinary trilogy of works on this international diplomacy and its consequences for the world and its relevance for today's world. Please enjoy and head over to jeffrich.substack.com, where you can learn a whole lot more from history, including watching the entire interview, all the other interviews with Michael, free of ads and algorithms.
There was a lot of stuff going on, but wasn't enough. And Stalin wouldn't listen to his generals. Basically, that was it. He wouldn't listen. And the price that they paid for not listening was very high indeed.
And that price was Operation Barbarossa, June 1941, the invasion of the Soviet Union, with active collaboration of various people across Europe and with plans to have various kind of puppet states, controlling the remnants of the Soviet Union to be the, racist war of conquest and annihilation and enslavement of the population.
Correct.
What was the impact of this German invasion on the Soviet Union? I mean, I guess it's a whole subject in itself, but I mean, it's perhaps worth just commenting on the nature and the scale of it, and I guess the way it then affects the alliance relationships between the Western powers and the Soviet Union.
Well, the opening months of the war were a complete, were an utter catastrophe for the Soviet side. The general staff had to remove 177 divisions of the Red Army from the from the Soviet order of battle. Estimates are that 3 million soldiers. In the first 6 months of the war, 3 million soldiers were lost, either from, killed in action, disappeared, or taken prisoner by the Nazis. In fact, the larger portion of those losses were prisoners of war, and the Germans treated them so abominably that large numbers of those prisoners of war were died of abuse, starvation, illness during their captivity. Large areas of the Soviet Union were occupied by the Germans, who had orders to summarily execute Soviet officers, Soviet officials, collective farm heads, communists. They were all to be executed on the spot large areas were destroyed. Entire villages were wiped out. But the remarkable thing is, in spite of all the horrors that the Soviet population faced, in spite of all the defeats, in spite of everything, they weren't French. They weren't French, and they weren't Poles, and they didn't quit the fight.
Mm.
And, in hundreds of places, along the front or by, Soviet units that were caught behind, the front lines. They fought. They attacked the enemy. There were reports of Soviet soldiers playing dead amongst fallen comrades, and pulling a grenade or killing a last German before they themselves were killed.
Mm.
And it reminded me of a statement by Churchill. The least any British person could do if the Germans invaded Britain was to take one of the son of the bitches with you.
Mm.
And I concluded in my book that he would have understood the courage of the Red Army soldiers who wanted to take one of those son of a bitches with them.
Mm.
And so it was a catastrophe. The first 6 months of the war were a catastrophe. But the thing that was remarkable in all the horrors that occurred during those 6 months, the terrible losses and the German abuse of civilian populations, and the beginning of the killings of the mass killings of people. The Soviet side did not quit the fight. And one of the things that really angers me about McMeekin's book is personally angers me, is his dismissal of the Soviet war effort. And he makes one exception, and that was, of course, the Battle of Stalingrad. But his general view is to dismiss the Soviet war effort as of little consequence, and to dismiss the personal courage of the Soviet people who fought against the German invaders and eventually expelled them from the Soviet Union and destroyed them in their last redoubts in Berlin, 1945. It was a remarkable thing that they did.
Indeed. And I mean, like I've been to Russia and visited various of the war memorials and the war museums, like the Siege of Leningrad museum in St. Petersburg, and you can't help but feel the continuing presence of that memory of courage and sacrifice in Russian culture and popular memory, I guess, today, and to simply dismiss so much suffering as a kind of nationalistic propaganda, I think is really just a simple misunderstanding, or worse, a conscious misrepresentation of the actual human phenomenon, really. How did Stalin go from, I guess, that famous shot of him bent over sort of thing, to, how did he respond to the realisation that he made a terrible misjudgment on the intelligence that had been provided to him?
If you believe Molotov's memoirs, he admitted that they'd screwed up. I think that's the words that are used in the English translation of Molotov. He'd screwed up, and it took him a while, to learn how to be the commander in chief. And it took him a while to learn to listen to the advice of his generals, because he wasn't used to doing that. And when he did start to do that, he became an effective war leader, and he, in becoming an effective war leader, he became respected by the large majority of the people of the Soviet Union, who were inspired by him. And I'm sure that somebody like McMeekin would be horrified by hearing me say such a thing, but nevertheless, I think that is true. And there's the Stalin of the purges, and the Stalin commander-in-chief of the victorious Red Army, and that's why it's so vexing to to have to, when you're forced to draw conclusions about Stalin. It's just not easy. It's not an easy thing to do.
But he does go through a personal transformation, I guess you could say it, or some sort of. He changed his leadership style, to use sort of somewhat anodyne sort of management speak, during the war, in response, and was and clearly, if he hadn't done that, I guess it would have been pretty dire, I guess, for the Soviet Union. And he then also becomes part of the big three, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, and over the course of the next 4 years, has various alliance meetings, once the war turns after Stalingrad and Guadalcanal and Alamein in 1942. There's the various like Yalta and those kind of conferences to discuss the sort of the post-war sort of settlement. The toxic triad of anti-Semitism, fascism, and anti-communism is still there to some degree in Europe and also in the United States, I guess, as well. How did this sort of uneasy alliance between like in a way, Stalin's finally got his wish. He has a defensive alliance with the Western powers in the worst possible circumstances. How did this alliance sort of play out for the rest of World War II?
The idea in the West is, and there have been a lot of opinion polls about this over a long period of time. The opinion in the West is that the United States and Great Britain basically won the war with a little help from the side of the Soviet Union. You asked every man or every woman in the United States about who won, the Second World War, or who played the greatest, most important role. They'd look at you as if you were stupid, and you were putting them on because, of course, the answer was why the United States was. But here's a couple of facts for people to think about. Soviet Union came into the war on the 22nd of June, 1941. At that time, there were no British or American or Canadian divisions fighting anywhere in Europe. And that continued in 1942. There was, of course, there was action in North Africa, of course. But while there were 200 plus the German divisions fighting on the Soviet front, there were 2 or 3 German divisions fighting in North Africa. So if you do the math, that comes to the Americans and British fighting 1 or 2% of all the German ground forces fighting in Europe. That was their contribution in 1942. Roosevelt thought that the Battle of Stalingrad was the turning point of the war. The fighting in Stalingrad ended at the end of January, beginning of February 1943. The landing of at Normandy didn't occur until 16 months later. The battle, of course, took place in July of 1943. That was 1 year, 11 months before the landings in Normandy. The only place where the British and Americans were fighting was in Italy, which began in September 1943. Churchill's idea wasn't to help the Soviet Union by starting a second front in Italy. It was to rush up the Italian boot and wheel southeast into the Balkans to block an advance of the Red Army into that area. The way to Berlin at that point was almost due north to attack Berlin from northern Italy, and of course Churchill's idea was that all this was to happen very rapidly, a rush up the Italian boot, and then the wheeling into the Balkans. But in fact, the Allied forces in Italy didn't get to Rome until June of 1944. And all this time, the large majority of German Axis forces, that meant Hungarian, Italian, Romanian, and other smaller forces from Europe, they were all involved against the Red Army. So who are you trying to fool with that stuff? It was obvious that the Red Army carried the main load against the ground forces of the Axis powers. At the end of the war, the estimate was that the Red Army was responsible for 80% of all German casualties, and imagine what that percentage would have been before the landings in Normandy. It would have been even higher. So the idea that Meekin tries to sell was that the Americans played the major role and the Soviets had a secondary role. It's all rubbish. Mm-hmm. It's complete rubbish. Just bears no resemblance to the facts. Mm. You don't have to convince any Russian citizen of that. You have to convince people in the West of what really happened.
And the relationship between the Allies was strained at times because, I mean, Stalin sought more help, basically, and more real help at various times. Of course, the United States was fighting in the Pacific as well, which, of course, was very much also in British interests, I guess, as well. It did have an Asian empire. What was the sort of relationship, particularly between Churchill and Stalin, like during this period of time?
Well, up until Stalingrad, the relationship was at times very strained. In the first months of the war, the relationship was strained. It was often strained 1942 because because the Red Army was doing all the fighting, and the British were doing basically bugger all except for North Africa. And Stalin was infuriated by that. Churchill went to Moscow in the summer of 42 to try to calm him down because he knew that they were that Stalin was so angry about the lack of help from his allies. And if you read the Foreign Office papers for 1942, you get a feeling that there's a sense of guilt in the Foreign Office about the lack of British help for the Soviet war effort. And that changes at the end of 1942 with the Soviet victory at Stalingrad, because people recognized Roosevelt being one of the most important. That was the main turning point of the war, and that there was going to be a lot of fighting to go, but that this was a war they were going to win. Nazi Germany was basically going to be fighting a losing battle until Berlin. Mm. Churchill had trouble controlling his anti-communist demons, and they started to come out again after Stalingrad because he realized they were going to win, and he started calling the Russians barbarians, crocodiles. The story about the analogy with a crocodile. Churchill said, well, with the Soviet crocodile, you never knew whether his smile was friendly or he was just preparing to eat you, or words to that effect. So his most important ally was becoming a barbarian or a crocodile, who was not really a friend. And there were all sorts of problems that began to develop in relations between the British and the Soviet side, especially in 1944. In fact, in the Foreign Office, they were horrified by some of the indiscreet statements that were being made by British generals expressing their contempt for the Soviet Union and the Red Army. And I got a really good quote here.
Yep.
I can read to you. This is a quote from summer of 1944, and it's by a Foreign Office official who was the head of the Northern Department, which was responsible for relations with Russia, Soviet Union. Quote here: Anglo-Russian post-war relations will be irretrievably prejudiced with the most appalling results for perhaps 100 years. This is altogether too high a price to pay for the prejudices of the Chief of Imperial General Staff, who was Field Marshal Sir Alan Brooke. This quotation there was written in response to the reports that the Foreign Office had about British generals making disparaging comments about the Red Army. He talks about consequences, appalling consequences or results for perhaps 100 years. And this was a statement made in 1944. So let's see, if we do the math, it's 44 be 56 plus 56, 76, be more, just a bit over 80 years. And we still have these appalling relations between the West and the Russian Federation. So this statement by was Christopher Warner. He was the Foreign Office official who made this quote. He was pretty damn near on, spot on.
Mm. And in Britain's case, of course, like in 1942, the Quit India movement begins. Churchill jails Gandhi, Nehru, most of the Indian independence movement. The sort of Asian empire in China is sort of under threat, or it's been taken over, and also in Southeast Asia, obviously, as well. So, and part of the sort of anti-colonial movement, which is already sort of brewing, is, allied with the Soviet Union, with communism as well. So, communism is actually also seen as a threat to British. As Churchill once said, he didn't fight. Well, he fought World War II to keep the British Empire going for a couple more generations, but it looked pretty grim in 1942, and still looked pretty risky in 1944. And Churchill perhaps provides is an interesting transition to the long Cold War, because in the final months, I think it is, of World War II, he thinks up the unthinkable of, turning against his wartime ally, the Soviet Union, and he devises a plan, Operation Unthinkable, in this period, a plan which I think we talked about in the first interview briefly, but which was not kept secret in the archives until, I think, 1980s, 1990s, maybe?
No, 1998 it was.
1998. So, I think roughly the same year that Britain finally left Hong Kong, it released this plan, Operation Unthinkable. Can you tell us about Operation Unthinkable and what it sort of reveals, I guess? Yeah.
I could, but I would like to make a point. The propaganda on the Allied side, Soviet, American, British, Chinese, it was that they were that the Allied side was fighting for freedom and democracy and the liberation of peoples. And you can make all the comments you want about Stalin's behavior after the end of the war. I wouldn't call that exactly democratic processes, but I wouldn't call Western colonialism democratic either. And we keep on talking about the democracies, France and Britain and Holland, so forth and so on. They were great colonial empires, and they certainly didn't establish democratic processes in their empire. And at the end of the war, de Gaulle, for example, played this heroic role in the French resistance against the Nazi occupation. What's he go and do? He seeks to reimpose French colonial rule in Algeria, Madagascar, Indochina, the French military forces. They massacre large local populations. The British, Churchill, he tries vainly to maintain the British Empire. I wouldn't call that democracy. We had Jim Crow in the United States, segregation. I wouldn't call that democracy. There's a lot of propaganda going on that didn't bear too much resemblance to reality. And just wanted to get that off my chest.
Yeah, no, it's a really important point because, as you say, like quit India, 1942. One of the leaders, I think it was Garter Bose or something like that, explored allying with Germany to throw off the British rule, and has been, castigated for it since. But, Churchill basically jailed all the independence leaders. That's not terribly democratic. And was, of course, there was the Bengal famine in 1943, which, I think the death estimates there are in the order of 5 to 7 million people, which is astonishing. When we, and it is simply not talked about in the West in terms of conscious acts of policy that have killed a very, very large number of people. So I think it's really a point well made.
Yeah, there's also a film, which I think I saw on Netflix, which is about Indian military formations that were raised by the Japanese to fight for Indian independence. And the film presents those Indian forces in a very sympathetic way. And, it just, it underlines how, in many ways, how complicated the history of the Second World War, how complicated it is. To add to all the complications is Operation Unthinkable.
Yeah, which is a bit of a postscript on all of this, isn't it? Right. So tell us about Operation Unthinkable.
Well, Operation Unthinkable wasn't cooked up by Churchill. It was cooked up on his orders to his general staff. And basically, it was a plan to mount a military operation against the Red Army, including large numbers of former members of the Wehrmacht, to drive the Red Army back towards the east, and to allow the London Poles, the conservative Poles in Poland, to take control again in those parts of Poland freed from the occupation of the Red Army. And if you read, I have a brief quotation here. If you read what is in the opening lines of this plan, I guess you could call it a contingency plan. you'd have to think that it was drafted by lunatics, by crazy people. Let me just give you an example. The overall or political object is to impose upon Russia the will of the United States and the British Empire. Even though the will of these two countries may be defined as no more than a square deal for Poland, that does not necessarily limit the military commitment. A quick success might induce the Russians to submit to our will, at least for the time being, but it might not. That is for the Russians to decide if they want total war. If they want total war, they are in a position to have it. End quote.
So what was the actual plan put forward in Operation Unthinkable?
Well, the plan was to organize British and American forces and German forces to attack the Red Army on the 1st of July, 1945, and drive them back to the east, and in the best of all possible worlds, to lead to the disintegration of the Soviet Union.
So this has been done like after, before the end of the war, like that. This plan has actually been conceived and written up before, the occupation of Berlin. Yeah.
Yes.
And they're basically saying, I know we've been allies for a couple of years now, but we're going to turn the guns on you now.
Yeah. Yeah, but here's why it's so. When historians look at this, they often say it was completely impractical, and it was completely impractical. But there was also completely immoral.
Yeah,
immoral. The Soviet side has spent 27 million lives in a common effort to destroy Nazi Germany, and here the war in the Far East isn't even over, and they're wanting to make war against the Soviet Union in Europe. And there's another thing that one needs to keep in mind. The last great offensive of the Second World War was by the Soviet Union. It was by the Soviet Union in the Far East in August of 1945, and it was a 1 million man Soviet army that invaded Manchuria and defeated a relatively powerful Japanese force of roughly 700,000 soldiers, and occupied all of Manchuria, or most of it anyway, in the course of roughly 2 weeks. The Red Army at that stage had become a juggernaut, a tremendously powerful military force, and to think that Operation Unthinkable might have succeeded against the Red Army in Europe is pure fantasy, pure delusion on the part of the people that cooked up this plan. And there's one other thing that's worth knowing is that the Soviet intelligence picked up information about this plan and was beginning to prepare for it.
Interesting. Yeah. But it was delusional, but was it like seriously, was it, some delusions, as we know, as we've seen over time, as we, perhaps saw in 1941, can be taken very, very seriously. Was this just some, like some crazy option C that someone wanted to dream up, or was it something that was expressed a serious intention, a serious sort of disposition of the British and American elites, because they're talking there about the USA and Britain working together, I guess? how seriously considered was it?
I don't know. The order to the British General Staff came from the British Prime Minister. They cooked up the plan, and I think the first version of it came out middle of May, and they continued to discuss it for some time, and they finally concluded quite wisely that it was impractical and unwise and not a good idea to try to carry out. And it was kept secret until 1998, and you can understand why. And I was being sarcastic in the last pages of my book. I suggested that British leaders should have got that document and put it into the put it into one of those document destruction devices, so that nobody would know about it. Nobody would know how not only impractical, but how immoral it was to even think about that on Churchill's worst days, when his demons were at him to turn against the Soviet Union.
But practicality and morality were at times not particularly strong barriers for Winston Churchill.
But 27 million people.
Yeah, I know.
Fought in a common cause to bring down the Axis, to destroy Nazi Germany. 27 million people. And for a good part of the war, they fought alone on the ground against the Nazi Wehrmacht and against Nazi and Axis ground forces. They fought alone.
So it's sort of like it's one of these late expressions of the dark triad you were talking about, or I guess maybe the anti-Semitism comes out and is replaced maybe with something, maybe just anti-Slavism, but it really is an astonishing thing. That takes us to the end of your story of the Great Game, Michael. I guess so we've gone through Stalin's gamble, Stalin's failed alliance, and Stalin's Great Game. And, I guess as we've discussed it over time, some of these events are still commonly referred to today. And in particular, I mean, this I guess the moral weight of what you're saying there about well, is betrayal a right word? That sort of sense of moral betrayal of an ally that's expressed in that Operation Unthinkable document, I guess also then gets carried on in the Cold War. But, I mean, what would be your perhaps final word to viewers on the significance of these three books that you've written and the story it really tells about how we remember World War II, Soviet Union's attempt to form a defensive alliance, the failure of that attempt, and then the catastrophic suffering that was unleashed upon both the Soviet Union, Europe, and the world through the failure of that diplomacy in the 1930s?
Well, this has been a 30-year project for me, basically. Half of my adult life, I guess you could say. And I'm going to have to leave it to other people to decide whether they think these books were worth my trouble to spend half my life working on. I certainly consider them to be my legacy to future generations. after I'm no longer around, I'd like my work to be recognized as an honest attempt to interpret the information that I found in the various archives that I worked in over time, and I'd like it to be said that I made an effort to report the truth of what those archives seem to tell us about the interwar years, about the Russian Revolution, about the early Cold War, and about the conduct of the Second World War. And I would like it if it could be said that I made a contribution, however modest, to defeating the Western, Western propaganda describing the conduct of the war. I guess that's all I can say.
That I think certainly, judging by most of the comments, there's always a few stray funny ones, of course, on the YouTube, but there's been tremendous appreciation of your work, and many viewers have reported how much they've learnt from these discussions, and quite a few I know have even gone out and bought themselves copies of the book. And you were saying also just before we started recording that the second volume, Stalin's Failed Alliance, is just about to come out and be launched in its Russian translation in October 2025.
Actually, the 23rd of October. Yeah, there's supposed to be an event at the Russian Historical Society, where a lot of Russian historians will get together and we'll have a Zoom sort of event, and we'll talk about the Russian translation.
Yeah, no, that's really tremendous. And just over the last week or so, the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has certainly made remarks about the events, described in your book, which have an uncanny resemblance to the arguments made in your book. So I feel, at least at some level within official circles within Russia, there is understanding and recognition for this extraordinary achievement of yours, Michael. And I'm certainly incredibly, deeply appreciative of the time you've given me, and I've learned so much from these interviews. So thank you very much for that. And I'm sure all the viewers to the program will very much echo those sentiments.
Well, I'd like to thank you for your strong interest in my work and allowing me to not always dispassionately talk about these events. And I hope I'll be forgiven by your listeners if occasionally I allow my emotions to show, perhaps a little inappropriately.
Well, emotions are, after all, part of our human condition, the way we actually, gain insight into the world, and you can't help but have emotions over events of these kind of consequence. So, but thank you so much, Michael. It's been a fantastic set of interviews.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much for joining me on this extended series of interviews with Michael Jabara Carley about his books, Stalin's Gamble, Stalin's Failed Alliance, and Stalin's Great Game. I'd like to thank Michael himself, as I did a moment ago, for his extraordinary generosity, his wisdom, and his 30 years of research and effort put into this great work. I hope you have learned a lot, as I have learned a lot from my discussions with Michael. And of course, his books are available from the University of Toronto Press, and Russian viewers can also read in the Russian translation, Volume 1 and Volume 2 of his works. Please like and share this video with others and spread the word, because there has been so much nonsense written about World War II at times, and the diminution of its of the role of the Soviet Union, China, and other parties apart from Britain and the United States in this war, in this dreadful, dreadful war, which has and still does shape the modern world. Thanks for joining me, and I will be back with more interviews, discussions about history, and discussions about the world of politics and culture today in another video really soon.